For this sample, we are going to be doing basting and gathering. A basting stitch is when you extend the length of the stitch out as long as it will go, and then you sew whatever you're gonna sew. Usually it's for a temporary purpose. Sometimes it's for gathering. So we are going to do a basting stitch, and then we are gonna gather the basting stitch. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go up here to my control panel up here, and I'm going to extend the length all the way up to 5 so that it will be the longest stitch possible. So that line blinking in the middle tells me what the standard stitch length is, but I've bumped it all the way up to stitch number 5. This being on 0 means we're not doing any type of zigzag or width, so that's the straight stitch. The number 1 also represents the straight stitch. So now we're going to come back over here and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance with that long basting stitch. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance away from the edge. We are not going to backstitch on this because for a few reasons. Like I said, usually it's for a temporary reason or for gathering, and we don't want a knot at the end or else we won't be able to pull on the threads and gather, and we won't be able to easily take it out if we're removing it later. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start out with a nice long tail, so at least 4 or 5 inches of a tail, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. Do not backstitch. Start close to the edge and then go all the way down to the other side. When we cut it off on the other side, we are going to leave a long tail as well because we're going to be doing this basting stitch or the gathering. We want a long tail on each side so that we are able to pull it the way that we want to pull it. So a long tail on each side. Now we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side. So you're going to be a 1/4 inch from your 1/4 inch, but it's the line between the 3/8 and the 5/8. Start close to the edge. I'm going to keep these threads out of my way so that we don't accidentally knot them up and make them useless later. So we're just going to go forward at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to keep these threads down here out of the way as well. We want to finish off with long threads at the end as well. So we have long threads here and long threads at the beginning. You're going to repeat this process on the other side of your fabric. So we did those 2 seam allowances over here, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. We're going to do a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch on the opposite side of the fabric. Start out with long threads. Don't backstitch. Okay, we have a long thread on this side, long threads on this side, long threads on the bottom, long threads at the top. So we have 2 seam allowances on each side. We are only using 1 piece of fabric. I forgot to say that at the beginning. Only use 1 piece of fabric for this because we're gonna gather it, and it's harder to gather when you have multiple layers. All right, so now we're going to gather this top and bottom edges of our fabric. So each side we have threads that are finished and they come off of the top, and we have threads that come off of the bottom. So you can see here's a top thread, and then here's the bottom thread that comes out on the bottom. We're going to separate those threads. I'm going to take both of the top threads and I'm going to hold them in my hand. I'm just going to leave those bottom threads down there, laying down there. And then I'm going to pull on the fabric and hold tight on this, and it'll gather your fabric together. We're just going to go to the center and it'll gather that fabric together. As you hold on to this and you slide your fabric down those 2 threads. So there we go, they're nice and tight. Now, we wouldn't usually tie a knot here because we're probably gonna sew over the top of it and make this gathering more permanent. But instead, because this is a sample that we're turning in, I would just like you to tie this off so it doesn't come undone, and then you don't have gathers when it gets turned in. So I'm gonna just tie just a regular knot right there so that it's tight and it doesn't come undone. Now we're gonna do the exact same thing with the other side. We're gonna take these top 2 threads, leave the bottom 2 down there, hold on to it, and gather it up nice and tight. Okay, and then I am gonna tie a knot here just so that I can keep this nice and organized and to itself, and that when I turn it in, it will actually look like it's supposed to and it won't have loosened by the time you turn it in. If you've tied all your knots in there, you can go ahead and trim off all of these big long threads. Now, depending on the project that you're doing, you know, the rules are gonna change for a basting stitch, but that's the purpose and use of a basting stitch. So now you know how to do it. When it comes up on a pattern, you'll know what a basting stitch is. So it's a the longest stitch that you can do. So there's a gather right there, and we have a gather on this side. We're gonna cut off these threads. Honestly, it doesn't have to be super professional. It's just a little easier to turn it in without 1,000 threads hanging off of it. Okay, that would be acceptable. So I like to call this our hammock, that by the end it looks like a little hammock. It can look like a candy wrapper. But this is what you're gonna be turning in. Write your name on it and your class period, and this is the basting stitch and then gathering.